Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back, everyone.
Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Stephen. Lovely to see you.
Good to see you as well, and everyone else.
Well, our speaker today is Stephen Tierney, who is a true friend of the Sangha, and we're so happy to have him again. Stephen is a psychologist, a psychotherapist in private practice in San Francisco, specializing in addiction and recovery. His approach to therapy is grounded in mindfulness and trauma-informed techniques. He's the co-founder and CEO of the San Francisco Mindfulness Foundation, and he was for many years a professor at CIIS in counseling psychology, and he's now emeritus, which is a lovely word, I must say. So welcome, Stephen. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Joe, and everybody. Thanks for inviting me and allowing me to be here. It's a really interesting time. So the poet Lao Tzu said, new beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. New beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. And so here we are in December of 2020, and we might be reminded of that old curse, may you live in interesting times, because indeed we do. And I think interesting times is probably a word we should all focus on rather than some of the other words that we've heard about and we'll talk about a little bit today. But, you know, I think that for me, first of all, for me, coming back to GBF, I was the first day that GBF had to go to Zoom meetings in March or whenever it was. I was asked to fill in as a replacement for someone. And so I was your first Zoom speaker. And I'm here today as San Francisco and the region go into lockdown again, back to super lockdown. And so I was wondering if I've developed like a niche, which is that, Esther, let's have Stephen come and speak. But then I realized that I'm much too small a cog in gay Buddhism, or much less the universe for that to be the case. But just the reflection of it, that is a reflection of our capacity for, you know, negative self-talk a little bit. And so it was interesting that came to my mind. But, you know, there's an old saying in the recovery community and other places that there are two things that humans don't like, or that men don't like. One is things exactly as they are, and the other is change. And so for all of us, 2020 has been an opportunity to have these interesting times. Sharon Salzberg, one of my favorite Buddhist writers and teachers, said that she was originally attracted to Buddhism because of the possibility of a life lived in peace, ease, and authenticity. And so I've been thinking a lot about what that means for us as gay men and our allies, and really focusing the last few months on possibilities, and the idea of possibilities rather than limitations, and how we can show up in our lives and in our spiritual practice, really awake with the possibilities that exist for us. As I reach the end of 2020, I reflect on how many Dharma talks, webinars, podcasts, news articles that I've experienced, that started out with the author being overwhelmed, the times being unprecedented, and this year being very possibly the worst year in the history of humans. But, you know, as Buddhists, we practice really deeply to focus on the present moment, where there is suffering, and we are told an end to suffering is possible. But not being perfect, I am, and I'm sure some of you have spent a good bit of the year using some of those very words, unprecedented, overwhelmed, etc., and ruminating about the travails that the myriad political realities, political and social realities, health realities of 2020 have wrought on the world, on our communities, but on our really certain days, mostly what they've done to me as a person or you as a person. And of course, that's also something that our spiritual practice gives us a great opportunity to remember, that the Buddha, believing in the innate nobility of all beings and the interconnectedness of all beings, didn't really leave us in any of his teachings the opportunity to stay focused on just self for very long, and to feel ethical and centered when we do that. So I've turned to this concept of possibilities and really being alive with possibilities. And in fact, there's some vaccines on the horizon. We have a new political era starting. Within a foreseeable future, we might be able to safely travel again to distant places. And importantly for me, and I don't know about you, but the opportunity to get a warm hug from some of you guys and to give one and to be touched by other human beings. Those are all things that are possible at some point in the coming days, weeks, or months. And again, of course, as the Buddha taught us, we're focused on living in this moment. And so today, San Francisco and the Bay Area go to this new level of opportunity for us to behave responsibly and to protect the health of others, of frontline workers, of the elderly, of the children, of each other in this Sangha. Many folks in this Sangha have immune systems and other conditions of young, middle, or my age that put us at a different risk level. So today we're given the opportunity to not lament having to wear masks or lament my not being able to get a hug from somebody, but to say, how can I show up and joyfully do what is healthy and responsible, and to feel really good about that that's a possibility to be of service in a very small way, that I just have to take a couple of simple actions and I can really improve the health and calmness in the community. So how do we end suffering with all this going on? Ajahn Brahm has a book, and he refers to what's going on as who ordered this truckload of dung? and the implication of the title is that the truckload has arrived. And so the question is, what are we going to do with it? And for me, I've been meditating with, there's a jazz singer named Jose James, and I read these lyrics, and it says, "It's not that I am out of mountains to climb. It's just that sometimes you have to stop to consider the one you've already got under your feet." So it's not that I am out of mountains to climb. It's just that sometimes you have to stop to consider the one you've already got under your feet. And I was really moved by those words. It seems to me to be the essence of Buddhist practice. There are things that I could be doing for the future, and things that, careful planning and next right action is perfectly okay. It's a good thing. But that as the poet I mentioned in the beginning, Lao Tzu said, new beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. So as we come to the end of 2020, it might be a really good time to just stop and think about where we're at. And one of the true gifts of Buddhist practice is this idea of returning to our original nature. How did we do in 2020? And for those of us in recovery, we do something called the 10th step, which is at the end of each day. We just simply ask ourselves the question, how'd you do today? How'd you do today in being your authentic self, in living by the principles that you have adopted for yourself, or the values and beliefs that you hold to be dear? So where am I in December 2020? And what mountains do I have under my feet? So just a word about me. On December 1st, which was last Tuesday, I was clean and sober for 25 years, which is kind of cool. I didn't expect that to be a fact of my life. Never thought I'd live that long. And on my next birthday, I will be 70 years old. Also didn't think that would be a truth in my life. So I've been blessed in both of those cases to know absolutely certainly that I don't do any of that alone. That I have this wonderful opportunity to practice with people like all of you here today. I think there's 45 of us or something. to share your truths and to offer mine. In my younger days, if I imagined speaking to a group at all, or my story being told at this age, I would have thought it would be a very short book on the bottom hazard warning section of some gay bookstore. Like, here's the things not to do if you want to live to be a ripe old age. But here I am, and I've survived all of that, and relatively peaceful and happy, and living with, as Sharon said, some level of ease and authenticity. And it's because I come to groups like this and have a chance to talk and listen and share practice and meditate. And it's all been very important. So, so it's not to say there's not suffering now and then, and that hasn't been aroused. But the suffering, the Buddha promised there is suffering and there's an end to suffering. And so here, all of us are around this room, the 45 of us, relatively healthy, relatively sane, and relatively connected, interconnected to other beings, the 40 here and other folks in your life and other sanghas you practice with, and colleagues where you work or study or dance, caring people. And so that's the beginning. Sharon Salzberg has a new book out that some of you may have seen. It is called Real Change. I don't know if we can see it. There you go, Real Change. It's just out recently. And she reminds us in there that the use of the word Dharma, we all take refuge in the Dharma, and those are the teachings. And it's often referred to as the truth or the law, as suchness, as exactly the way things are. But in Sharon's research, she's found that if you translate from the Sanskrit directly, it can also mean that which upholds us or that which supports us. And very interestingly, that which we can rely on. And so if you think about that which we can rely on, if you think of the end of February of 2020 and what your life was, what you were doing, what you planned to do in March, April, May, June, summer, and fall, and today it's December 6th, and Sharon suggests that we ask the question, what is still true? If you think about all the things you were going to do and had to do something different, that's different than saying all the things you were going to do and couldn't do. That's a way of thinking about it. But all the things you were going to do, and you had opportunities to do something different, opportunities to reach out to people electronically, opportunities to think social distance, but to practice digital connection, to practice emotional and spiritual connection. So what is still true? Well, what is fundamental to you or to me and to our heart minds? And what is fundamental to our belief in the Buddhist practice of complete interconnection to all beings? How did we do that? How have we found ways to do that in 2020 that are new? Not what we planned, not what we ordered, not what we wanted. As Ajahn Brahm says, who ordered this truckload of dung? We didn't order it, but it's here. And we found ways. We're all still here in December, showing up on Sunday mornings and because we care for ourselves and each other. In her book, Sharon asked us to think about something that she calls the stress dynamic. And that's a concept that's I'm really finding very useful and working with in my life right now. And she says that the stress dynamic is simple. Everybody has stress in their lives all the time. Before March of this year, we had stress in our lives. Sometimes enormous stress based on a work deadline or a relative that was coming to visit for 2 more days than we wanted her, him, or them to come visit. Sometimes because we had to have a meeting with our bosses or our funders or our employees or our colleagues. There was all sorts of stress in our lives. And it was monumental on some days for us, those things that I just mentioned. Not quite enough money to get through the end of the month before the next paycheck comes, and not having a paycheck for the moment. And all those things were stressful. And then this year rolled out. And so we still have stressors, and they're different, and they feel monumental, as did, if we think back on it, the ones from last January and February. And what Sharon says is that don't think of it as stress, think of it as a stress dynamic. And the dynamic part of that implies movement, implies flexibility, elasticity. And she says that the stress is the first noble truth. The Buddha was very clear. There is suffering. But what she wants us to focus on is this the dynamic piece of a stress dynamic. And that's really the third noble truth. And the third noble truth is that there is an end to suffering. The Buddha has often been quoted as saying, there is suffering. I've came to teach one thing, suffering and the end to suffering. So both equal. But what Sharon means and encourages us to practice with, and what I've been trying to practice with, is the dynamic piece, the moving piece. What is it that I can arouse to meet whatever stress happens this day? I know if I have a good meditation practice, I know for me, if I'm practicing my recovery principles, I have the capacity to arouse some inner resources that might not be always engaged, probably a good thing, but I can arouse them. And that more importantly for us as a Sangha, that when I arouse all of my inner resources that are available to me on a given day in a given situation, I then have the capacity to arouse the external. There's a phone list for this group that has names on it of guys that you can call and just ask a question or just say, I'm dealing with this. Have you had to deal with this? And so it gives us the opportunity to acknowledge the first noble truth, that there is stress, that there is suffering in life, and that, some of that we allow to be stressed when it doesn't have to be. So the first thing we might arouse is to say, is this really is something that I need to be focused on? And then to find what resources that we have to cope with that, the internal ones, and when those need support, to go to the external resources. So in the Firebrand Sutra, we are taught the true definition of virtue. And it says a wise disciple has compassion for self, has compassion for others, and the wisest disciple has compassion for self and others. And the way the Buddha worded that is, you can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserves your love and affection. And so I think that's really such an important concept for us that, some of us do service and do volunteer work and are engaged in things almost as a distraction to keep from focusing on ourselves. And so when we vow to be of service to all beings, I live in the Bodhisattva vow, live for all beings. It seems like that's a monumental task until you realize that all beings includes you, must include you. So one truth that I've rediscovered and embraced in this interesting year is sometimes it feels like there's so much to do, racial reckoning in our country. 1 in 6 children in America will go to bed hungry tonight. There's so much, all the things going on in politics and healthcare and mental health care and addiction. I just feel like, there's so much to do. I'm not sure I can have any real impact. And so, I can either just take a step back, particularly during this period of COVID, perfectly reasonable. I live alone in an apartment on the top of a building, and I could just stay here, as I have been asked to do by the health department. And yet I think as engaged Buddhists, and just as decent human beings, that I must do something, and we all must do something. And so one thing that I think our practice really gives us the gift of is that we have right view, right intention, right speech, and right action. And part of the thing that I really have been focusing on is right speech. We live in a world where there's massive amounts of information and intentional misinformation floating around. So I can make it my practice, as Thich Nhat Hanh teaches us, to use only words which nurture and not divide myself, the family, or the community. And so that's an opportunity to say, I'm going back to my personal values and personal commitments to the Buddhist path, and saying, so that's my view. My view is that I want to be interconnected and of service to all beings. My intention is then to only use words and actions that nurture and not divide the community. And so how can I do that? That seems an awfully large recipe or necessity. So, Some of you have probably seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma. One of the scholars that writes about those topics is Yuval Harari. And he has a book called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And he puts it this way: the world is deluged with irrelevant information, and clarity is power. And so the way I see that for us as Buddhists is if we practice right speech, I find that there are many debates that I don't need to enter. Recognizing that I have opinions, I can reflect and bring mindful awareness to where those opinions came from. And we talk about facts and fake news, and I can spend some mindful time to bring mindful awareness to the things that I would insert into a conversation or a debate or a dialogue, and figure out where they came from and how I tend to attach to some of them really strongly, and really want to really share those with everybody as if they had some concrete capacity to change opinions and move society forward. And some might, but the question is, where did they come from and why am I holding them so tightly? So Thich Nhat Hanh in that same teaching reminds us that before we speak, to ask ourselves the question, is it true? Is it useful? Is it timely? And is it necessary? Do I need, if there's a huge conversation, if the world is deluged with information flow about this topic or that, do I really need to engage in the conversation? The poet Rumi says, if your words are not more important than silence, be quiet. And so that's an opportunity, not to stand down from all conversations or to stand down from offering guidance or wisdom if you have some, and especially if you're asked for it. But it's really an opportunity for us to think about wise speech and wise listening. So, just for me personally, in the early days of the epidemic, having worked in public health for 30 years, I was often asked questions by people like, what do you think? And I was quick to sally forth with my judgments about that. And I found that I like the social media, like to drop big round numbers and big horrifying predictions about what would happen if we did this or if we didn't do that. And then I realized that while some of the data involved in that was true, my point was to be recognized in the conversation, or my hope was to be recognized in the conversation, and that my intention might have been to be useful, but the impact of what I said was to add to the stress of other human beings, of people who had asked me the question or were within earshot of the answers. And so for me, there's been this real opportunity to say, everybody has opinions about this new lockdown we're in and why it is and how long it will last and all of those sorts of things. And the fact is, none of us actually know. Another Buddhist principle is to be comfortable living with uncertainty. And certainly this year we have the opportunity to do that. And many of us get most of our information from either social media or conversation or text with friends. And so we hear things and they concern us, or we doubt them, or we want to argue about them. And depending on how you and your friends communicate, that can be okay. Healthy debate and conversations of that kind can be fun. But most of us are too busy to actually do any real research and critical analysis about that variety of issues that 2020 has brought to us. Some of you do, and maybe do it for a living or do it as a avocation. But the simple practice of right speech would suggest to me and to most of us that we start out any conversation we have with something as simple as, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but Pod Save America told me blank, whatever it is, or Bob or Charlie or somebody told me blank, whatever it is. And I offer it to you just as something I heard, and we can talk about it. So Yuval Harari reminds us that the future of humanity is actually determined on some level by this discourse that's going on. And we certainly live through a political season where we know that the nature of the political discourse really does shape the future of humanity. And so when I suggest that I've stepped back from getting involved in a lot of those conversations, Harari reminds us that using wise speech and wise listening add value, because just because you are absent from the debate does not exempt you or your community and family from the consequences of the debate. So it seems to me like we really do have this opportunity to think about these Buddhist virtues of wise view, wise intention, and wise speech. There's a quote from a person named Mikhail Bakunin who says, "Freedom, morality, and human dignity of the individual consist precisely in this: that person does good not because they are forced to do so, but because they freely conceive it and choose it." So how is it that some of us on good days, our first response is to be of service? If someone is feeling sad, our first response is to be present for them. Not to fix them, but to be present. That's an act of service. If someone needs an ear to hear them or a heart to be holding of them, that's just our natural. We do it not because our service requirement or engaged Buddhism requires it. That's true, but because that is the core value that we operate from. And I think part of a concept that I've been thinking about a lot lately is the concept of moral injury. And if you know what that is, it's a concept that first started with soldiers who were forced to do things in battle that were a complete violation of their religious or spiritual or firmly held beliefs. And it expands to folks like healthcare people who have to decide which people will get treatment first based on some algorithm or paradigm. And what that means is some people won't get treatment. And so they're denying treatment, which for a healthcare provider is really a moral injury to them. They're operating outside their ethics and their values and their morals. It applies to teachers sometimes when they have way too many kids in their classroom and they have to decide which children to focus on. Do they focus on those most likely to learn and have an educational experience, or those who need the most help? And in either case, again, it means somebody gets and somebody doesn't. And so in our own lives, we make decisions every day about how to engage, how to be present, how to meaningfully show up for ourselves, our friends and our families, our colleagues, our students, whoever it might be. And we realize that, again, there's that difference between what I intend to do with my words or actions and the impact of that on the other people. And so if I decide to be present for person X, which means I can't take the call from person Y or meet person Y for the conversation they want to have, I did it because I couldn't do both. I had to make a decision. That's okay. I made a choice that the person X needed my company or presence more than the other person, maybe. Or maybe I decided that I was more likely to have a positive experience with person X because their problems weren't quite as complex and multi-leveled as person Y. So whatever the decision, we then live. I then have to live with what's called a moral injury. I chose not to be present for that person Y. Lots of good reasons for it, but the injury has occurred nonetheless because I like to think of myself as somebody who shows up when asked to show up. So the fact is that we make these decisions in our life and that they can be hurtful. And so the practice, I think, that makes sense for us as Buddhists is just, again, to pause and to bring mindful awareness to the fact that even in the vow, we vow to be present for all beings. That means to be present in many ways. I can be present by simply showing up in the world and not causing any more chaos than there already is in the world. So if I'm taking care of myself, that is showing up for other people. There's less chaos because of the way I'm showing up. If I'm showing up encouraging people to be healthy by modeling healthy behavior, that's a way of being in the world. But we live with these decisions that we make, and we sometimes think about, well, I'll go back and apologize to person Y tomorrow. And that's an okay thing to do. That's a good thing to do. But it's not enough. One of the things we have to do is go back and take a good look at ourselves and say, how do I care for myself today? Because I too was injured by that decision yesterday. I have a view of myself as somebody who lives to be engaged and be helpful. And yesterday I wasn't. And so that hurts. And I'm now carrying that karmic seed of pain. And so if I don't pay attention to that, I might try to do twice as much tomorrow, which is not necessarily the answer. Might be that I could up my game and do some more. But that's not necessarily the answer. The answer is, what are those values which I hold most dear? And how do I continue to respond from those values? The decision was that I could help person X more yesterday. That's not a bad decision. But it injured me because I want to be able to help both people that ask. And so make sure that I'm not nurturing that seed of I'm not enough, I didn't do enough, I wasn't able to show up enough. But to hold that view, non-duality. I did what I could do. And somebody needed to be there for person Y, and it couldn't be me. But do I have to own that? Do I have to be negative about that? So I think the first step in this process for us as Buddhists is to use our meditation practice and our opportunity to talk with each other. Because I think for most of my life, and maybe yours, I occasionally would go to a workshop where someone would put out some chart and tell us to write down our 4 most important values. What are the 4 values that you hold most dear in your life? And sometimes that was in doing a single word. And, we would all rush and say, truthfulness, service, honesty, and something, pet small puppies or whatever the 4th one was. And so we would all have those ideas. But the reality is that most days, most of us don't actually think about what our core values are. We get up, we do our morning rituals, and we go out into the world or out into our living rooms and turn on Zoom. And we try to get through the day, to be the best person that we can be, hopefully, to be as connected and loving as we can be, hopefully, and to be busy enough, but not so busy that we're causing exhaustion for ourselves and others, hopefully. But I think there's an opportunity for us during this period of time to really take a look at how we show up and what we can do. So I think it's an important part of our Buddhist practice, and for myself and others in recovery, our recovery practice, to bring awareness to what my personal values are. What are those I share with my Sangha community? And what are my ethics? How is it I'm going to walk through life? Is it love, compassion, service, and connection? Those are reasonable within Buddhism. And then how will I exhibit those? How will I bring presence to those on a day-to-day basis? I think it becomes really important. And then the fact is, as I mentioned, there are times when I've acted in opposition to those values. Maybe because I thought my own survival depended on it. Certain political decisions or public health decisions were being made that impacted me or my community. And I had to behave aggressively and, in my mind, had to develop plots and plans and negotiations and manipulations to get the right thing done. Sometimes it's because we think we have to protect self, family, friends. Sometimes it's because we have to maintain some view that we have, something really important that we hold and believe. Pema Chodron refers to that as the possibility of getting hooked. And she teaches us simply, there's always the opportunity, another opportunity to get unhooked. To think about, I'm gearing up. You cannot, there's an old saying that I won't quote exactly right, but you cannot prepare for war and prepare for peace at the same time. So there are folks that disagree with that, but that as I'm getting ready to engage in those kinds of behaviors that I think are necessary and express those views and have those arguments and negotiations that I think are necessary for survival, for protection, for the enhancement of our community and our health, I get the chance to say, let's take a good look. Are those really in line? Are my actions in line with the qualities and values of my heart mind, of my Buddhist practice? So I recommend really strongly that we do exercises as a regular part of our spiritual practice, looking at our values and looking at what's important. If we assume walking through life that we're Buddhist guys or whatever we might be considering ourselves, social justice activists, racial equality activists, feed the children, heal the world activists. Those are all beautiful things. But if we assume, it's common knowledge that all men engaged in serious Buddhist practice would operate from a place of compassion. It's a compassion practice. So of course we would do that. So, I think, but if we assume that without going back to reflect on it, without bringing mindful awareness, which is one of our gifts, I think we end up with the government that we've had for the last few years because we assumed. And I think we would have a hard time trying to figure out why 70 million of our fellow human beings, having looked at the last 4 years, thought that that was an okay thing to have for 4 more years. So I can't make the assumption that I know what people think. I can't make the assumption that I know what everybody values. I, like some of you, and there may be people of many political persuasions here, so that's not important to me. But the decisions of people to vote for differently than I did, 51,000 people in San Francisco voted to continue what we had for the last 4 years. And now, because statistically, I live on the west side of, the western part of the city, and statistically, that's where most of them live too. And so as I wander around my little neighborhood of West Portland now, I notice that if I'm not careful, I can be looking askance, trying to figure out which one of the people walking in front of me holds those views. And what I've come to through Sharon's teachings and Yuval Harari's teachings is that what I'd really like right now is well, first of all, if we could sit down and have dinner, to have dinner with some of those folks and just to ask from a completely place of respect and dignity and curiosity being the important one. What is it that brings you to those beliefs and those core values that you hold? And let me tell you with dignity and respect what my core values are. And so we have that opportunity to really do an evaluation of our core values. What is it we hold important? There was a lot of yammering about blue versus red and all that stuff. And Obama put it well, and other politicians have said it doesn't matter blue or well, we're all in this together. And that's so true. And so who is it that's behind those easy categorizations? As gay men, we've lived, all of us, through lives where we were easily categorized as something. And even within our own community, tops or bottoms or butches or femmes or, whatever over the years we've been categorized as. And the fact of the matter is we're all much deeper than that, in our own community. And in Buddhist practice, which is supposed to be, by the Buddha's teaching, very, very horizontal. We are all practitioners. We are all children of the Buddha, disciples of the Buddha. And the fact of the matter is that in most lineages, there's a fair amount of horizontal stuff going on, and that people get labeled as new students or beginners or somebody who's not quite practicing correctly. So even closer to home in our sanghas and in our lineages and in our families and friends, there's this opportunity to know that each of us has beliefs, each of us has rules that we'd like other people to operate by. Each of us has a storehouse full of habitual behavior that we in our community have developed for survival and protection. Some of us have a storehouse full of habitual behavior that we've developed because we'd like to be conflict avoidant, like to never have another loud argument with anybody, or certainly not a physical fight with anybody. So there are some things that I've developed that are behaviors that are just conflict avoidant. As the Black Lives Matter movement has taught us, reminded us, demanded of all of us, whoever we are, in the last year, we can't sit silently by and allow people to say things or act in ways that we just stood back from because it wasn't my business or I didn't know quite what to say. And so we have this opportunity to practice some true humility. Taking a look in recovery, it talks about humility is taking a look at who you have become and deciding what kind of person, friend, partner, spouse, colleague, you want to be, and then taking the right action to become that person. So we have this opportunity, it seems to me, to broaden our idea of who we are and to have that idea be connected to some values that we really cherish. Those can be values taught to us by the Buddha. Those can be values taught to you by your family. Those can be values that we have had taught to us or retaught or rekindled by the political movements, Black Lives Matters and Feed the Children and other political movements for a sustainable planet. And those are all ways that we can show up. The last time I was here, I spoke about Gatha practice, which is a practice. There's a wonderful little book called Zen Vows for Daily Life by Robert Aiken. And Gatha's practice is really about picking something that we can work on. And they all have a certain rhyme to them. And if you remember, which you probably don't, but maybe some of you may have the practice, but they're basically usually 4 sentences. And it's picking one thing that's happening in our lives, a situation, a challenge, a wonderful opportunity, or a delight that's happening right now. And then putting your intention into that, like, I will continue this, or I will change this, or I will show up in this way. And the wonderful thing about the way Robert Aiken writes them is the second sentence always says, I vow with all beings. And the reason he does that is because it takes away that sense of isolation or uniqueness, or that we're somebody special. That, for instance, when faced with, a health challenge, I vow with all beings, because all beings face health challenges. Or when, and I'll just read you a couple of his. When I panic at losing my bearings, I vow with all beings to acknowledge the error, that the error is the panic, not losing my space. Or my favorite one, when left with nothing to say, I vow with all beings to rest content in the knowledge that there really is nothing to say. So they're just little 4-sentence vows that you stop and say, what's going on today? I have to have a meeting with this person. Sometimes they aggravate me or diminish me in the meetings. And so when faced with a meeting with person X, I vow with all beings to find a way to listen wisely so that peace will be expanded in the meeting. And so just some little ways of doing that. And the reason that I support Gatha practices is I think oftentimes many of us come from a generation or a background or a place today where we really want to change the world. We want to share what we have in Buddhism or in our recovery communities or in your families and sanghas with everybody. And we want everything to be better. And the fact of the matter is that sometimes we just have to go slow. And so the Gatha practices, is taking a small vow each day or each week or one for the season, is really a way of saying, I'm going to recognize something that's an opportunity, and I'm going to do something about it. And I'm going to acknowledge that we're all in this together. So I vow, when faced with isolation during shelter in place, I vow with all beings, because we're all on shelter in place, to find a way to reach out and connect so that community is established and enhanced. It's just a simple little 4-sentence, and you don't have to use any specific language, but it's just a way when you're doing your daily meditation, just before or after your meditation, just a way to say, what's something specific I can do? Because what we know is that human beings need to have success experiences. We need to feel like we actually contributed something. And if making sure that 1 in 6 children don't go to bed hungry tonight is my vow, that's not probably going to happen today. And it's going to be frustrating and feel like a failure. And it might stop me from having that as a priority. But if I have the opportunity to say, who's doing good work feeding children in San Francisco, and I vow with all beings, when confronted with the idea that children are hungry, to volunteer or to donate or to somehow be present for that group. Just something simple. And I want to close, and then we'll have some time for questions if anybody has any. But here's a poem by Martha Postlethwaite, and she says, do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world, so worthy of rescue. And so I vow with all beings to always be as present as I can for all of you, and to allow you the opportunity to be present for me, because I think that's how we begin to make change in the world. Thank you. So I think we probably have a few minutes if anybody has a question or an idea that would enhance any of that, or disagree with any of it, whatever you'd like. Jim?
Stephen, thank you for a wonderful talk. It's terrific to see you again. Last night I was going to the store and I passed the local bar that is set up, restaurant spaces in the parking lots outside. And 2/3 of the people, my little inner cop was just enraged because 2/3 of the people were not wearing masks and they were spewing forth spray. And I just thought I was going to call the cops and have them get raided. And then I thought, it's just, that's so it's so old. It's such an old, unseemly, righteous cop inner self of mine. And so when I walked back, I walked on the other side of the street just to relieve myself of that tension. But it astounded me that so many people were so flagrant in their disregard for public health. And I'd be curious what you thought would be a mindful, graceful response to that type of situation.
Yeah, well, I think you did. Your gatha in that moment was to wearing your mask correctly and firmly, being a big, strong, powerful man, to walk down the street with your head held high and your mask on. So you're modeling good public health, that big, strong men can wear masks, and that was a good thing. I think for some of us, if that sort of thing was going on, calling the police might have been right action. Because those people were putting themselves at risk, and everybody, most San Franciscans, 54% of the city live in apartments. So just a family unit, they're putting all the people in their building at risk when they go home, or wherever they go after the bars close. And so, for some, it might be to call the health department on Monday morning and say this bar is not practicing standards so that might be an action. But I think you should feel good about what you did, which is to say, I'm not going to add any more chaos to the world by standing at the side of that shed that they've built where they're all drinking and screaming at them. Walk on the other side of the street and model what good public health looks like. And so I think that's the kind of thing where, you can feel that your vow was lived fully in that moment, and that the feelings that come up are real. So we have to do what you just did, which is share those with somebody that's like, that pissed me off. I'm doing the right thing, and those people are putting me and the people that I care about at risk. So they can have some social time, and so you own those feelings, and then say, how do I respond to that? I respond by continuing to model sanity and good public health in my own actions.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. Mike.
Hi, thanks again. I always appreciate the opportunity to hear about right speech and right intention, and all of those right things. I'm still very much a novice in terms of Buddhism, and I welcome the opportunity to hear those again and again, because it seems I need to hear them all the time. So just to kind of get my head together. So I want to thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think at least some of us, I think here, are still very much on a learning curve about basic Buddhist principles. And so I just want to thank you for that. And I also want to appreciate Jim's share. I mean, I can readily understand I think he did the perfect thing, Jim. I mean, it's interesting because my partner and I were out the other night in the Castro, and the opposite was the case. Every single person, and there were a lot of people, but they were really trying to follow the guidelines. And I think it's a very difficult period. And I think myself, we need to have compassion for people who either can't or won't get it, as well as for the people who are trying to follow the guidelines. And it is a very difficult time, I mean, I think, and this newest, set of edicts is, I think, controversial, but I won't go into that in my own background is in public health. I was in the public health service at CDC. I worked in the academic intelligence service. I have my own views. And frankly, I think there's a little hysteria. That aside, my own reaction, I want to be able to be measured. And, and so anyway, but thank you for the coming back to these basic ideas, these basic teachings, because I find them very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other hands, so we'll turn it back over to Joe.
My hand actually was raised.
Blue hands. You have to look at the little blue hands. We have Jason and then Tom.
The little blue
hands. Okay. Little blue hand number one.
So here's my little blue hand. So I just wanted to offer another perspective that I feel like is a counter to a lot of what you've said is very focused on us, on people, on, am I doing enough? And, the doctors that have to make their decisions and like this sense that they're not gods, they, can only do what they can do and people die. That's what happens in life. And there's a part of it, I just read an article in the Sun magazine and a woman, I think she's an ecologist or environmental woman. And she's basically talking about, the impact of humans upon our ecology and about how we have gotten into such an anthropomorphic, right? We are the only thing, right? We are the only creature that has consciousness. So what we say is how the world is impacted. And 50% of, they say that 50% of species are going to be extinct, in the next how many years. And so part of me asks the question around this pandemic of like, well, who do we think that we are, that we get to get away with exacting this upon the earth and that something doesn't get to come out and actually also affect us too? So I really just wanted to point that out as a sense of, I just feel like that a part of what you're saying just feels very much like, oh, us and me. But what also is going on in the larger world? What's going on in the larger vision? And where do we have to also, be part of that and also allow ourselves to go through a process of dying as well? So, and I think that that's the biggest fear right now is that we have such a medical model of, no, we can take care of everything. But no, we're not that powerful. And we live in the world, and the world includes death. Yeah. And making people shelter in place and not have a benevolent society that's going to, say, okay, we're going to allow you to not pay rent. We're going to, right? No, people, who are not the privileged people that get to stay in their little home and be okay are struggling. Mm-hmm. They're being, perpetrated by family members. They're being, their lives are being destroyed. And so I just really asked the question of like, what is all this about? And I think it's about this fear of death. Yeah. And, oh, poor me.
Well, that's certainly a view that you're entitled to, and that makes perfect sense. And I think what I was saying is it's not just me, but to have a focus on that which I actually can impact. And certainly Engaged Buddhism talks about being responsible to the Sangha and the planet. And so what you're saying is very insightful and helpful when we expand our capacity to be engaged with the other species and to place ourselves in the context of that wider view. I think it makes perfect sense. But I was talking about more today was my own and perhaps our capacity to not be overwhelmed by the nature of that. And so I'm glad you brought it in. But to take the small actions that we can take to make our families, communities, sanghas, the planet a better place. So I think we actually agree with each other. I think
sure. One thing I would just caution is at the beginning you said, we'll be able to get back to flying planes and going off to places again. So again, I asked that ecological question of like, okay, great. So we're going to go back to normal, which is just thinking again that we can continue doing business as usual. And that's a really problematic view. And also just want to lastly just say, you can also just say that that adults are starving in San Francisco too.
Right.
I pass by enough homeless people who are not eating. So it's not just the children.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we're on the same place. You'll notice that nowhere in the beginning of that did I say get back to normal. It's one of my, I'm deeply committed to that normal is what got us into all this. So we'll be somewhere else. But you're right. My example was an example from privilege that, I would like to get on an airplane again someday and go someplace. So I own that. Thank you, Jason. And there was one more hand, I think.
Little blue hand.
Little blue hands.
Oh, that was me, Thomas. We're short on time. So, Stephen, I just want to say thank you for the moral injury perspective so that once I make a decision, I don't come around later and wonder why am I feeling guilty or why am I feeling inadequate? So that's helpful for me to prepare for the outcome of my decisions. And with that, I'll just say thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Good to see you. Okay. Joe, I think it's...
Hi, Stephen. Yes, I want to ask if there's any announcements. Anybody has an announcement they want to share? Well, I would like to say that it's the time of year that is our annual fundraising appeal. And I would like to remind us all of Donna. And there's a lot of us here today, which is so wonderful to see. And if we all give what we can, it makes a huge difference. So please be mindful of the fundraising appeal. And I see Jerry has put in the chat about our next speaker. You can all read that. I won't repeat it. Any other important announcements? Well, then, Stephen, I might ask you if you would like to do a closing for us.
Why don't we sit for a moment and just take a deep breath. And I offer this particular verse. For all the beneficent karma ever manifested through me, I am grateful. May this gratitude be expressed through body, speech, and mind, with infinite kindness to the past, infinite service in the present, and infinite possibilities in the future. May we be healthy, happy, and safe. May all beings be healthy, happy, and safe. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good week.
Thank you, Stephen. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Stephen.
Bye.
Stephen.
Congratulations
Thank
on
you.
your anniversaries and your birthday.
Yeah, well, the birthdays are still a little bit away. I'll still get to be in my 60s for a little bit of time.
Enjoy.
All right, take care. Bye, Joe.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.